the Wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. This week, that would be through chapter 69 of Pierce Brown's Lightbringer. Hey there, this is Cross.
And hey there, this is PJ, imitating Crossland's sick voice.
We are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
I'm sorry to throw shit at you. You're feeling a lot better, as you've told me, but until that, I sound like shit. You sounded fine for the most part until that intro, and I'm like, he sounds pretty nasally. I'm going to make fun of him for it. So
yeah. Totally fair, totally justified. I do feel better, which is ultimately why we took a week off, but I'm nowhere near 100%. This is more of a, God damn it, I don't want us to get so far off track and miss 2 weeks in a row. That would be insane, because our fall has already been littered with a lot of schedule adjustments. So we want to we're going to round that out this weekend. We're going to finally get in front of it again a little bit. So. Mm-hmm. But as mentioned at the very top of this episode, today is our 10th episode. We're going to be talking about chapter 62 through 69 of Pierce Brown's Lightbringer, our penultimate part of Part 3 Tempest.
Awesome.
So before we get too far here, PJ, I would love to hear about what you're drinking tonight.
Well, I celebrated Thanksgiving this weekend with my in-laws. And I made the turkey because my company gives reimbursement for turkey. So I bought and prepared the turkey, which it still turned out really good, but I totally forgot to rub that thing down with oil before roasting it. So could have been crispier, could have been better, but it still turned out really flavorful and delicious. But in that, they all really like Mai Tais. So I made all the stuff and brought it to Wisconsin to make Mai Tais, including orgeat. So I'm like, all right, what can I do to use up this orgeat? And Trinidad Sour, I hadn't realized used orgeat as the sweetening. So Trinidad Sour is 1.5 ounces of Angostura bitters. You heard me correctly. I know Cross has talked about this before, but if anybody hasn't heard that episode, 1.5 ounces, like,
so good.
Rip off that shaker bottle top of the bitters and pour 1.5 ounces of that. That is the base of this cocktail. 0.5 ounce of rye whiskey. This is a bougie ass Trinidad Sour because I used the barrel.
Oh my God.
For that 0.5 ounce.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So barrel seagrass rye. Yep. And then 0.75 ounce of lemon juice, 1 ounce of orgeat. A lot of orgeat recipes call for blanching your own almonds, but I have found that the best, easiest home recipe you can find on Anders Ericsson's YouTube channel covering syrups. I think he covers grenadine and like cinnamon simple and orgeat, and then one other, I can't remember which, in the same video, but he's got the recipe right there on the description, but it uses unsweetened, unflavored almond milk instead of just blanching your own almonds. So it's almond milk, it's sugar, and then it's almond extract, rose water, and orange blossom water. So
for the record, I use Anders Ericsson's recipe for orgeat 100% of the time.
Yeah.
I never go through the nut milk process because it's the best way to do it.
I'm sure you could make a more true to form orgeat by blanching your own almonds, but this is perfectly fine. It's delicious, it's good, and it's done in 10 minutes.
Tastes right. Yeah. Right. Versus like a day process.
Yeah.
So
exactly. So yeah, 1 ounce of orgeat, and that's all shaken. It calls for a lemon twist. I didn't have a lemon. I just had bottled lemon juice, so it's not quite as fresh as I want it to be. And I don't have the twist, but all the same, delicious Trinidad Sour.
Love a good Trinidad Sour, man. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you're enjoying that.
And then my back half beer, unless you have commentary on that.
No, I love, dude, Trinidad Sour is probably like a top 3 standard cocktail to some degree for me. I love that profile so much. I'm totally with Greg from HTD. Angostura is like a godsend once you understand like what it is and how to use it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Like it revolutionizes and can be, I mean, it's like ketchup. It makes everything. I mean, or like barbecue sauce. It makes everything taste good.
Yeah, it kind of goes through that same process as absinthe does, where there's a total falling off point where like it gets more intense the more dashes of it you use, and then at a certain point, there's such diminishing returns that it really doesn't add more intense flavor, but allowing it to dominate the flavor profile lets you kind of feel and taste those nuances that you don't get just from having a dash of it. So happy with that. But Back Half Beer is a beer that you and I know for a fact, had way too much of recently, because it is the beer that I had on tap at my wedding, Cloud Snacks from Rocky Reef.
Nice.
We still had a can of it at my in-laws' house, so I took it
left
home.
over from when you and I were drinking it?
Yep.
Probably.
Yep, I think so.
Cool.
So
nice.
Left over from that. But yeah, we killed that keg with the 50-ish people that were at the wedding. So
yeah, the IPA keg, not the Belgian keg, right?
Right. They didn't have the Belgian in cans. That Belgian is so good.
No, I just mean at the wedding.
At the wedding, yeah.
We didn't kill the Belgian keg.
Correct.
But some of us tried.
If it was a 6-barrel like I had purchased, we would have. But it was a quarter barrel. So there was a decent amount left. But I paid for a 6-barrel. Like it was fine. So
nice.
Yeah. What about you, Crossland? What are you drinking?
I'm having something very straightforward. It's just like a modified gin sour. It's nothing crazy to remark upon. So gin sour, you're talking your simple syrup, you're talking your lemon, you're talking your gin, egg white, shaken, dry shaken, ice introduced, and then shaken, thrown in, whatever. Angostura to top the little creamy tops. But I did add a little bit of Saint Germain. I added a 1/4 ounce of Saint Germain just because I wanted to kind of level it out. And just give it like a different dimension. I've been playing around. A lot of times I'll throw in like a little bit of green chartreuse or like a little bit of absinthe or like some other modifying maraschino, some other like modifying liqueur. And I haven't really played a whole lot with Saint Germain. So I wanted to just kind of adventure down a little bit, taste it a little bit more, and then get an idea for like foundational cocktails going forward. So
from a few different sources, and I can't remember where off the top of my head, but between like YouTube channels and articles and just people that I know in the industry or bartenders that I've talked to, I've heard from many different people referring to Saint Germain as bartender's ketchup, as just kind of, or like mixologist ketchup. It's just kind of an unobtrusive, sweet, floral thing that you can add to most cocktails, and it won't fuck up the flavor profile, but it will really round out something that's missing something. So good on you.
Yeah.
I need to pick up another bottle of it.
I've heard similar things, often exchanged with maraschino. It's pretty similar. It's not the same profile. It's a different profile, but it is generally used for the same kind of light sweetness rounding, not nearly as sweet as Saint Germain.
Right.
So I did, knowing that I was putting Saint Germain in, I did tone down the sugar a little bit, but that's about it. To follow that, I'm having a beer from Thirsty Dog Brewing Co. called Cerberus. Cerberus here, our 3-headed dog, is a Belgian triple IPA, or Belgian triple.
Dude.
Not IPA.
Fucking love Belgian triples.
Yeah, man. I haven't had it. I'm going to take a sip. Fuck yeah, dude.
Hot or cold fermented? Can you tell?
Great question. It
won't
details.
say, but you might tell. Like if it's more peppery and more like spicy, or if it's more like fruity and like maybe some banana comes through.
Banana.
Okay. So it's a warmer fermented one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
very
love
tasty.
Belgian yeast because it's so diverse and you can do so much with it and all of it's good. It's just so different.
Yeah. It isn't actually banana, of course, but it is more fruity. It's in that sort of flavor realm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the reason why that happens is because the Belgian yeast, when it's fermented at a warmer temperature, it releases more esters, and those esters produce fruity flavors. One of the common ones is banana, which you also get off of like German Hefeweizen yeast. That's where that characteristic banana flavor comes from in that beer style. But Belgians, I tend to prefer like Le Fin du Monde. If you ever, that's a very widely available one. That one seems to be more cold fermented. So you get like really peppery, spicy notes off of the yeast profile.
If you're a member of our Patreon, or if you're looking at joining, we did a little Oktoberfest episode where we talked through a lot of commonly available beers. And that was one of them that we both drank and talked through and gave notes on.
Mm-hmm. I just realized I made a conscious decision to talk more about beer nerd stuff because I felt like I've been skimping on it a little bit. And
oh, no, all good. Yeah. I wasn't trying to cut you off either. I was just saying, as a
good.
point of reference, there's a ton of detail in that episode too that does a really good job kind of highlighting it. And we actively tried Le Fin du Monde and got to talk about some of those differences. So it is.
Did we on that one?
Very cool. Yeah.
Okay.
That was
I don't remember
one of
that.
the Belgians that we compared. We did two different.
Oh, we did.
Totally did.
We did an Oktoberfest one. Yeah. We did a Belgian one. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember doing the Belgian one.
Well, no, we in the Oktoberfest episode, we covered 6 beers.
Okay.
They were not all Oktoberfest beers.
Oh.
One was like a commonly available IPA. I think we did.
You're right.
You know what I mean?
I
we just did it
that.
for Oktoberfest, quote.
I think there was also an episode where we did like 6 different commonly available Oktoberfests. But maybe that was just you and I getting drunk and doing
I think that is pre-podcast, and that was when we were dreaming up ideas to do, like that one day where we bought the Stone IPA. And by the way, these ideas date back to like 2016.
Or that one day where we bought 12 different kinds of cheeses and made grilled cheese out of them.
We've done a lot of dumb shit. I mean, collectively over the years. So that also happened.
Okay.
Yeah. So
fair enough. Well, that
was a fun day.
Talk about
I would love to talk about your feelings about this week. Yeah. How'd you feel about this week's reading? It's been a bit. You had 2 weeks with it.
I did have 2 weeks with it. So I mentioned how it might be kind of mean if you just left me here to not get any more information on Darrow after last week. And that was untrue, but just barely.
Just barely. It was practically true. When you mentioned that, I was like, "Oh, damn it!" There's just that one chapter, but it's a good cliffhanger.
It was a good cliffhanger.
And,
it was the chapter that we came back to easily could have been at the end of this section or later. No, not really, because of Lyria's interaction with Severo and Darrow after that. So never mind. But the bulk of that information, like she could have had. I don't know. There could have been a way to get that chapter and all that information much later in the story and leave that on a cliffhanger while still allowing Lyria to go interact, maybe like at the foot of the cell, talking hanging out with Severo outside the cell and then talking to Darrow at the bars or something like that. Like that could have easily just as well have happened. But I felt this week.
Then we would have gone. Yeah.
Upset a lot. I was upset a lot about this week, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot to be upset about.
Yeah. It's not a happy set of chapters. There's not many of those though, so I should get used to it.
I do really like this week's focus in. And the reason that I did cut it this way is because I really like this week's focus on Lyria in this section, because it does feel like we are predominantly with Lyria and really give her like the time to shine in the spotlight. That's part of the reason that I cut it this way as well when considering the chunks and sections, because there was a part of me that was like, yeah, absolutely end on 62. We would have structured like another episode earlier and divided up part 3 into one extra episode. But in the end, and even in anticipation of this, I debated at the last second, not the last second, like this week, last week when we were maybe going to record it. I was like, ooh, do I include 70? Should we actually do that? It's only 5 minutes. We could read that. And then I went and read it, and I was like, absolutely not. Nope, we ended in the right spot. I'm so glad we did. Good work, past me.
So I'm glad you brought that up. Not like I haven't read 70 yet, but I did read accidentally I didn't try to, but I read the title of it.
The title? Yeah.
Hard to avoid. Hard to avoid that.
Passage of Stains.
But yeah. I saw HowlerPod posted their reread schedule. And it deviates just so very slightly in our breakdown, which I know you talked to Ben quite a bit before we actually started this and consulted him in breaking this down. But I think it makes sense from a community reread standpoint to continue that perspective and get 70 as opposed to leaving off on a cliffhanger like this. But with you and I, it makes a lot of sense to just leave off on cliffhangers. This is me talking without actually knowing what happens in 70, to be fair. But I recognize that there is a difference.
It's like a great meta thing.
Yeah. There's a difference in the philosophy of how you break something down when you're talking to a singular person and creating a narrative extended story for them, which is effectively what you're doing for me.
Creating your episodic adventure,
exactly.
Which is very different than the way that someone might create an episodic adventure when someone already understands the story, right? Which is what they're doing.
Yeah, as
my end points are for you, so and theirs are for everyone else who kind of knows those things. And I do agree with his call, both in their first episode to only go until I think 5, and I think we went until 6. Because the first section was the one that we, I think, went back and forth the most on debating. Yeah, we went to... Oh, no, sorry. That was in Morningstar. Hang on. 2 seconds. 1 to 6, yeah, is what we read through. And he was like, I firmly believe 5. And I'm like, I think I need 6 to, like, break this up properly to give you kind of, like, the leverage and split it well into 2 episodes that are similar length as well. There were a couple of points. And especially near the end, I think they're doing, like, the final part in 2 episodes. And we're doing it in 3. So... just as additional comparison points. So very excited for their season, of course. And if you haven't listened to them, make sure you go do. They're our little Atomic Pylon buddies, and they're the best.
They're good friends of ours. And I'm only saying that because otherwise Aaron will probably do something horrible to me.
And who knows? We might show up.
I won't. I won't go near those people again.
All right. With that, let's get into our chapters here. With that, we're going to start with chapter 62, Darrow, the Tyrant's Debris. I fucking love all of the chapter titles, by the way, for this week, for this entire fucking book. They're all so good. They're so strong. Really love it.
Is chapter... sorry, I know we're kind of on a time crunch here, so I apologize, but...
It's not that bad.
Is chapter titles something that has kind of fallen out of favor and is maybe like coming back into favor in the meta of like story writing in general?
I think it really depends on the individual, right?
Okay.
Like, so Stephen King will use, in some books, he'll use chapter titles as like big breaks. So they're almost more like parts or like acts, but they're not like a part in the same way that Pierce Brown's parts are parts, right? So it's like one of our episodes in The Dark Tower will be chapter 1. God, what's it called? Path of the Gunslinger. Chapter 4, Way Station. And that it will be 80 pages, but there are micro breaks inside of there where he has like just break points that are basically like chapters within the chapter. Christopher Rocchio uses a similar style to Pierce Brown here, where he has chapter titles, of course. I really feel like of all the people we've read recently, it's strange, but
Brandon
Sanderson just doesn't use titles. Yeah. Which is it's not wrong. It's just different. And like when we go to the first law, of which we also announced this week, all of those are titled and not numbered. So like that's a whole thing as well. So that's going to be a fun component for us to deal with.
That's going to be
read along.
Annoying. I'm going to go. I'm going to go ahead and number those. I think.
Yeah. No, we're going to go ahead and try to figure out something to like create a system within our
page
own,
numbers
like,
is probably the best way to do it, because you and I have strictly because you and I have the same working books. Mm-hmm. Like I know you have some collector's editions, but
yeah. I'm not going to use those to parse out the pieces and like put sticky notes in them specifically.
Yeah.
I may go physically read them, but I'm not going to use that to sticky note it. And yeah, we also have places for page total, page count, and we'll just do page to page breakdowns with those additions.
I think we should
and that'll
make
also,
people
we'll also
count
include
the
chapter
number
title,
of
chapter
words.
title.
We'll just do word number to word number, and that's how we'll delineate.
This isn't necessarily a spoiler, but one of the things about the first law, and then I swear to God we'll get back to Pierce Brown's Red Rising, is Abercrombie repeats chapter titles sometimes.
Oh, what the
to
fuck?
be reminiscent of themes of things that came before. So the page number is particularly important.
Within the same book?
Just sometimes, not often. Occasionally. Actually,
Fuck you, Joe.
I think in every single book.
Fuck you.
At least once in each book, if not twice.
It's probably fine if you're just reading the book. I get
there's definitely a reason. Yeah.
But think about the podcasters, Joe.
All right, back to Pierce. We start off this chapter with Athena's story and how she came to the rebellion. Her origin story here is absolutely brutal, but she's followed quickly by Ares' entrance into the room as Severo has donned the Twilight Helm once again. We then learn that it was him that brought out the heroes into this room with their heads still on their shoulders, that it's his eloquence, which is so strange to say in combination with Severo's name, that led to this moment.
It is kind of funny. The story that Athena tells is haunting, and while the story itself is unique, the idea of a haunting backstory for any of these characters is not unique. But
true.
Still, it's heavy shit, and I loved it. I loved the 11 marks that she makes in front of Cassius with the razor. The whole thing was theatrical and just heavy in the best way possible. I still don't quite have, maybe it's me. Maybe it's my weird imagination thing, but the characters seem to be in much more awe of the Twilight Helm than I was able to be. I didn't quite get what was actually happening. It sucked the darkness out is kind of, or it sucked the light out of the area is kind of the best way I could figure how it was described. It shrouded the area in darkness, which makes sense from the term Twilight Helm, but
yeah, so more or less, it looks almost ethereal is the way that I would describe it. So it seems almost otherworldly as far as it's represented, right? So when it peels back, unlike sort of the way that you might imagine, this is a weird way of explaining this, but in the way that a garage door rolls up and its folds kind of lift in, right, and up and over, it's almost like he just emerges from smoke. Is my understanding of that portion of the helm. Right.
Okay.
In addition, this is a different helm than has ever been donned before, but it is representative of it all.
Okay.
Now, the darkness power is another question entirely that I would love to answer here, but my fucking Kindle isn't working. Thank you, Amazon, for all you do for me.
Yep. Good boy, Amazon.
It will not load anything except for chapter 67.
It likes 67.
It likes Volga, as it turns out.
Who doesn't? Good old snowball. All right. It's fine. Good
question. We're going to get there. But yeah, the helm is very unique. It's incredible. And Ares becoming and being Ares is fantastic. Ares is back, baby. You know what I mean?
Hey.
And he doesn't let all of the other speeches that we talked about last week sit on their laurels. Severo outdoes himself, inspiring his friends here. And there are just so many, again, we talked last week about this a lot. But one of the big components here that I really appreciate is sort of the difference that we feel in the speeches and the way that Severo actually feels like he's really changed and understood his place and what he needs to do now from the beginning of this book, where he felt isolated and totally out of it. And now he's been basically shaken awake into understanding his place in all of this.
Yeah.
To start it off here, I've got a couple of different quotes that are a couple of different components that come out in the speech that are just excellent. And Severo has another speech later that I think is almost even better. We don't need to get into that immediately. We'll talk about that when we get there. But it's easy to make Da shiny in death, but we forget Da was a mess of a man, more broken than any of us. That's why he chose Athena here, why he chose Dancer, Harmony, and Dara. He took the broken people because he knew he could reforge them stronger.
Oh, man. Like, I know we mentioned and went on a tirade about it last week, but if you haven't read Sons of Ares 3, or if you haven't read any of the Sons of Ares, this hits so much harder knowing what happens within that series and like having the context for what he's actually talking about. Because it
just makes Fitchner such a better character.
It does. Well, it not that it makes him a better character, it makes you understand Fitchner more.
Sure. Yeah.
It doesn't change how I feel about Fitchner. It's just that I have context to care even deeper about Fitchner. I think
enhances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. But in a way that I would almost classify as required for this section to make this speech hit as hard as it does. I feel like that's important.
I totally get that. And it's necessary, and I think it builds context, which again is why I said that we had to make sure that we read it before this, because it does feel like there are parts of this that were written around or in conjunction with or with the idea of people having the context of Sons of Ares to truly deepen that understanding with Fitchner.
We still need to
especially after hearing his voice
for
the first time in a long time. Yeah, no, I talked about that recently, so we'll figure that out. But there's also a component here that happens where Severo calls Darrow boss for the first time since IG, and that got me all weepy for this first time since Iron Gold. And again, we're talking coffee shop notes. I definitely got a little weepy at this point in the coffee shop.
Kind of surprises me.
Yeah, man. I found in my, I don't want to say old age, but in my like age, there are like certain things that push me emotionally that I don't expect to necessarily. A lot of them are like groups of people coming together for whatever reason, or like people realizing that they like need each other in some fundamental way. And that sort of turn like means something deeply to me, even in like shitty action movies. For instance, like when we watch Dungeons and Dragons, I tear up when the like tiefling turns around and finally like becomes one with the rest of the party, the druid. And like that sort of turn, or like there are just so many different moments in that movie that like push me emotionally more. And this was one of them. This mirrors those same sort of emotional highs.
Okay.
So
awesome.
I took that down as a coffee shop note though. So
perfect. Coffee shop. Yeah. You coming through.
Coffee shop note. Yeah. Yeah. Again, what's fun is that we're reading this over the course of many weeks, and I read this over the course of many hours. So just an excellent little callback. Severo continues his speech, though, and says, Da was one person, one pissed off human being whose only power was realizing he could unlock the tide. He gave us permission to fight our way out of the cell they made us.
It's pretty powerful. It is. The words of rebellion. Feels good to hear Severo announce them so strongly. But the speech in general, I'm pretty sure, disproves our sort of Dread Pirate Roberts theory for Athena.
Yeah,
because Severo points out specifically that Athena was chosen by Fitchner and was a broken person. So there goes. Yeah. I'm not, if you haven't read it, who we assume to be Athena.
Well, we threw that away anyway.
We did throw it away.
I understand what you're saying. Yes. Yep.
I still felt like there was something like, oh, it's a Dread Pirate Roberts. It's a passing of the torch.
Well, the mask could have been put down, and then,
that's true.
He picked it up, or she picked it up rather, or he picked it up for her, right?
Yeah.
So there's still something going on there that I'm curious about. Yeah. I wouldn't say it completely. It invalidates the idea of it being something that is just inherited, but it might have become inherited as a part of him needing a placeholder for Rihanna, as we'd mentioned previously.
Or Fitchner tapped Athena, as we know her, to be someone important, and Rihanna gave the blessing of Athena to her, or something like that. I don't know. There are a lot of ways that could have gone down.
There are a lot of questions. But in this moment, we come to realize that everything is going to change, and everyone aligns on a plan in this moment. The plan that Athena agrees with is to break Fa however they can. Obviously, Darrow issued the challenge of Ashvar, of which we didn't mention. I didn't mention Ashvar strictly in last week's episode. I feel really dumb for not mentioning the fact that like that came through. As far as one of the points that we talked about, we kind of talked vaguely about the idea, but we never tackled it directly. But that, and the fact that that will be impossible to ignore because it is literally a challenging of one's honor, and as such, we know that it's a very honorific society, and that they have to, you know, deal with that.
So impossible to ignore, yes. Not impossible to fluke. Fairly easy to fluke. But what that would do, assuming that they're able to just kind of shuffle Wagner. I can't remember the right pronunciation.
Wagner.
Shuffle Wagner out of harm's way onto his own little planet. Do what he wants to do. Retire. Life of luxury. Zoo. All that. His granddaughter. Happy life. Wealthy man. All this behind him. Some chump dead. The problem is who gets to kill that chump. Lysander has a lot to gain for being that guy that kills that chump.
Does.
And Darrow
does.
Has a lot to lose for not actually killing Fa.
Ooh, do you kind of have an idea about where we're going to go?
I have no idea where we're going to go. But I know we're going to go to a point where there's going to be strategic decision making. And I think for the sake of maintaining the Obsidian like war structure, Atlas is going to allow Darrow to kill Fa and go through with the Ashvar and snub Lysander's kind of rise to power in the process, because the idea of another Obsidian revolt when they're already so organized is probably pretty dire. So I think there will be a strategic political plan to shift their plan as opposed to allowing, like, the plan effectively stays the same. Fa has somebody, a stand-in, die in his place and retires, and the world goes on, but Lysander doesn't get to be the one to kill him. Oh man, but that gives a lot of credibility to the Republic and to Darrow himself. So maybe they do that. They allow Fa to rise from the dead, as unholy as he is. Continue to lead the Obsidian, maybe for the 3 months that were initially prospected for him, and then Lysander kills him.
So kind of a best of both worlds situation.
Yeah, have your cake, eat it too. Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I prefer the Miley Cyrus route. Come on.
Yeah, that's fair. Who doesn't?
Right.
But also, who doesn't like cake?
True. Cake or death? Well, cake, please.
Cake, please.
Cake, please. I didn't expect such a run on cake. Anyway, absolutely, you should go listen to Eddie Izzard if you haven't already. Also, Dylan Moran, if we're talking about comedians, they're both excellent. They're both British and Irish, so I highly recommend. Athena agrees to do the right thing from our perspective, of course, and rescue the people of the surface. She also throws Darrow matters. Well, I mean, I guess like do the right is so, you know, we have to think about what right
do the
really
good
means
thing.
or is.
Do the objectively and truthfully good thing.
The morally sound thing. And ultimately, you know, it decides that she is willing to rescue and risk life and limb to rescue the people on the surface. She also gives Darrow Pyrophoros, of which we've talked about previously, of course, is this giant black hosta, which is the rim weapon, which is so fucking cool that Darrow's using a rim razor for some fucking reason. It's so neat. Just a different change of pace for him, but for the purpose that it was intended, and relays that more than anything else, this is a delay of judgment for him, not necessarily a clean pass or a clean slate.
So I've got a couple of comments. One, immediately. So he uses the toggle to like make the crescent, make the sling blade. There's a lot of crescents in this. There's Loon.
Yeah.
There's the Obsidian, and there's Darrow. What are you going to do? But do you think
Fair
this
point.
is... So I guess this depends on how the whole thing works. There's the handle, and then I imagine there's like a straight part of the blade and then a curve to make it look like a sickle, as opposed to being like handle and then immediately starts curving. So do you agree with that? Like there's like straight
Generally.
and then the curve after a little bit.
Straight section.
So do you think that this hosta, it's proportional? So like the curve is bigger and the thing is bigger? Or do you think the curve is the same size and there's just a really long sort of stick between the handle and the curve, but it's the same size curve at the end?
I think he'd extend, to your point, I think he'd extend like the handle distance and then the same sort of curve and
same
maybe
size
hold
curve,
it
or
more
do you think
aggressively on the handle?
Just kind of a little bit bigger curve because it's a bigger blade?
I don't think it's a little bit of a bigger curve. I think that he would maintain the same size because he kind of understands that and just adjusts the rest of the distance and where he's striking things.
Okay.
You know?
Sounds good.
It's more like a reach change than anything else.
Yeah.
He's going from a standard fighter to a polearm master, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Anyway, that popped in my head, and I wanted to
fun commentary though.
See what you thought.
What do you think?
I think
which
he'd
one
make it a little bit more proportional. He'd have a little bit longer, but he'd also have a larger crescent.
Yeah, I don't. Part of the reason that I don't feel like it should get too much larger is because it might become like almost unwieldy.
Well, it doesn't have to be
distance length
deeper.
and things like that.
It doesn't have to be the same.
Fair.
Like it
Actually,
could just be
good
like
point.
a shallower but longer.
Which
hook.
also, fun fact, is actually the design of the sling blade itself, as described as a historical military weapon, is not a scythe, which is the way that it's commonly thought of and depicted in a lot of the visuals that we get inside of the series. The sling blade is actually much more of a shallow, gradual blade that is meant to be like just it's more of a cousin of a scimitar than it is a scythe.
Okay. Cool.
If that makes sense. So, to your point, that actually reinforces
a scythe is a pretty gradual curve too, but a sickle is like a really aggressive
sickle. Yeah, the sickle is the yes. Yeah.
Whereas the scythe
I
is
did
like
sickle, not scythe. Yeah,
just kind of right angle off the top thing.
Right.
Anyway, going back to the actual commentary on the story, I am anxious to see how all of this plays out with the daughters. Mostly because Athena presented this as a consensus, because it is like, this is a true democracy as far as we can tell. But that very well could mean that 49% of the constituency were unhappy with this decision and want to see Darrow hang or be
not resolved for sure.
Like decapitated. He wasn't going to swing. But I think this will make for some very tense scenes later. And there's also the fact that it seems like the people that voted upon this were the first daughters, the people that were in that room. And everyone else, I don't know that for sure, but that's how it was described, with the people that were in that room where he presented his argument, where he gave that speech, were described as the first daughters.
Like I want to clarify. First daughters, I think, are the ones that are up front, that like conclave that are right there. They're the close ones that are behind masks. I think that the other ones are also considered maybe first daughters, but are people that were specifically wronged in the docks of Ganymede incident.
I thought that was the definition
kind
of the first daughters. Was anybody wronged and that joined because
it might
of that?
be that might be like used in conjunction, but just to make it clear, there's like a council of like small masked figures that are there, and then there's also like a larger group.
Okay.
I think the larger group, at the very least, is what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's who I'm talking about. I assumed those were the people voting. And I
thought the other way, but I understand.
Okay. That's fine. But either way, there are thousands and maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of others beyond the 7,000 that we were presented with that weren't directly affected, but were deeply indoctrinated into what happened and joined after what happened at the docks, who might be more venomous, who might be more radical. And like, there's a very real possibility that an overwhelming majority of the daughters of Ares are going to be against letting Darrow lead this campaign.
There's another part of me too that also thinks that this is an opportunity for the daughters to be like, all right, we heard your speech. We believe your passion. Let's like let it sit and we'll see if you mean it. Like prove it.
I think that's the sentiment of the people that voted. But I'm curious. I'm curious if
the
there's
unheard voices, of course, too. Yeah,
a lot more people, and if this is truly representative of that, of the daughters.
Totally. We then move to Diomedes, and his sentence is very different. Cassius is basically like let off the hook, kind of in a funny way. It's just like, all right, fine, you're fine, you're good, because everyone else said that you're good. Mostly it's Sevro's responsibility for you, so you're good, which is cool on Sevro and like Cassius's relationship. That's excellent for them. Mm-hmm. But to Diomedes, his sentence is very different, as he's pushed to lead a Trieste and agrees to become the ambassador for the daughters and the rights of the Low Colors to the Moon Lord and Moon Lords themselves. And this is an insane scene that happens between him and Ore, and as well as Athena. Like, this is just wonderfully portrayed. It's one of my favorite moments with Diomedes in the series so far, as it shows him both as like truly a man of honor, truly a respectable man, a politician, not a dummy, and someone of whom, despite being a stoic, has emotion.
Yeah. I think there's probably a similar and maybe even more violent possibility that whatever was voted upon is not a true representation of the sentiment of the daughters.
Ooh.
In this case. This case feels very much more tenuous.
I feel like the other way. I feel like this one feels less tenuous. It's kind of like a do it or die, but I don't think that they're like...
There seems to be a lot more...
There's a conditionality for Diomedes, for sure.
Yeah. And against gold in general is one thing, but against the raw house in general, like I could imagine most people in the daughters have been directly or indirectly affected on a personal level by that family.
Well, and that's what she says as well, is like, you are the oppressor, right? And she kind of goes through a lot of that inside of the dialogue, which is why I think that this is so well levied against Diomedes, and saying that, like, if you would have us, you would be the best advocate for us the other way, because you appear to be an honorable man, and more than appear, you are beyond a shadow of a doubt to everyone around you an honorable man. So prove it. Again, classic sort of Marcus Aurelian theory going on, spitting it back in his face. But
for sure. But given that, a lot of that argument and a lot of that reasoning is made off of the dissemination of information from Ore and her time with the Raw, which I would assume was fairly tight-lipped. Like that was fairly held close to the vest. Like, I can't imagine most of the daughters understand Ore's assessment of Diomedes Aura. So if that is the crux of the reasoning for allowing this to happen, and most of them don't know that information, it's going to cause a stir, or it has the potential for causing a stir. So I'm curious to see how this goes. I might be completely wrong, and this might have been broadcasted to every daughter of Ares, and they all got a true democratic vote on allowing this to happen. That could be. I doubt it. I think it was probably this council of daughters, if not that 7,000 first daughters, or however it breaks down. But I could see it being problematic.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about it so much from the perspective of the daughter's votes. I'm thinking about it more from like the moralistic high ground. And you're right, it probably is mostly an Ore reading, but I think the other side of that is the end of the last section, right? Which is where Diomedes pours his heart out to Darrow and everyone else. They're obviously listening. We talk about that kind of early on, that they heard, other details and stuff like that.
I don't think we've.
Yeah,
I guess we have gotten through that. That was this chapter, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. At the very least, the precursory stuff, right? Because this is our last Darrow chapter for the week. So there's a quote here as well that I really appreciate from Athena. We don't hold the sins of the ancestors against their descendants, Ra. Give me your oath, and I'll put the blade in your hand myself. And that is...
Yep.
It is so well said and so well done from her that I just particularly appreciate it.
Yeah, that she understands him seemingly very well, and he seems to be true to the way that he presents himself. So I'm happy with how this has all gone so far.
Cool. All right. That rounds out the first chapter of the week. With that, we get to chapter 60. I knew that it was going to be a long one. There's so much that's like theoretical and wonderful and lovely. But with that, we go into chapter 63, Lyria, Mashed Taters. And in particular, of course, we're back to the theme of the series. We're talking about food again, right in the chapter title. So you know that it's going to be a big deal. This chapter is a massive deal. This is a bacon and eggs level deal here. But I really appreciate this almost like little people chapter here that we get as Lyria shows us the other side of a rebellious organization. And of course, she's on the outside. Truly, she's a nobody here and is treated as such. She still does prove that she's capable and weasels her way past a green and a yellow and makes her way into the room where it happens.
Social
engineering. The team is chatting about next steps. Yeah, social engineers her way right into that room like the best of us, Bill Smith. And she tells Severo that she must talk to Darrow.
What's on the screens? This is where we could have seen the thing.
Yeah.
The thing that they ominously point to later on. She's looking at it. She doesn't actually take a look at it. Fuck.
Right there. Very, very good. And it does beg questions. What I love about this too, to some degree, is that it solves like a problem by core that exists inside of Morningstar, something we talked about before. There was a secret. And because we were in the perspective, the secret didn't feel earned. Now that we're outside of the perspective and we're able to view it from another perspective, it feels like there's something that's going to happen. We don't know what the fuck the thing is. And so it feels like it's building tension and creating tension for us, not knowing what's going on.
Right.
Unlike
I can still be upset about it. I'm not upset, but I am.
Oh, entirely.
No, I'm not upset.
But at the very least, it feels justified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I'm sure I'll find out soon.
But then we move to the cafeteria where Darrow is hunched over a pile of chow. This is a great moment for Lyria again, where we see that she's got the firmest spine of any single character in the series, unbending and always standing up for the right thing. It's impossible to not love the potato bit where she pulls the tray away, and as it's going away, Darrow with his fork spears the potato and shoves it into his mouth. It's just like, it's such a nice little moment and exchange between the two of them. These reds staring each other down, especially from opposing clans as well.
Yeah, totally. She's so headstrong. We know that. Like, of course she is. And she knows the way that she's standing up for herself is very counter to the way that Darrow expects basically everybody to interact with him. He gets away with so much, more or less from raw intimidation, just from being who he is and carrying himself the way that he does. He gets a lot of leeway from all facets of life. And she's one of the few people that we've interacted with that actually stands up for herself against him, which is kind of cool to see. And she has leverage. Like she has leverage. She has good standing within the Republic. She has everything that she needs in order to effectively stand up against Darrow. And she uses it consciously or not. Like I think she would still stand up for herself if she didn't have that good standing and didn't have the leverage that she does. But she has exactly what she needs in order to do this effectively.
Yeah, in particular, because she does, it just emboldens her point, right? Like, it makes it all that much better. I think that it also makes a strong case for her as a... We've talked about this a little bit previously. It makes a strong case for her that she doesn't need the Oracle to be a powerful individual in like a political way, and like the way that she stands up for things. She makes that very clear over the course of the chapter that she is a capable individual, perhaps until the very end. But you know, she does well for a lot of this, showing her strengths and her ability to stand up for herself. So
that's true.
So not to be outdone, we get our final speech of the set as Lyria sets to earn her own among our legions of orators of the last couple of chapters. She says, "You destroyed my world. It's gone and never coming back. Part of me will always hate you for that. The farther and farther I go from Mars, the more I miss it. The more I want to fight for it. Lads and lasses younger than me will be shouldering rifles against Atalantia soon, if they aren't already. Lads and lasses that lasted the assimilation camps like me. It wasn't their choice either to leave the mines. You chose for us. But they ain't hiding or whining like I've done. They're fighting. This is my choice. I want to help." I slipped into an accent there.
You did.
Unintentionally.
Unintentionally?
Yeah. No, entirely. Yeah.
All right. Well done. I found this speech particularly striking for a main reason, and that's the distinction that she makes between Mars and the mines. And it seems like that distinction is there because she understood, and her entire like generation understood, that there was something above them. There was civilization on top of Mars, whereas Darrow, so for that reason, the mines are her home, Mars is not. Whereas Darrow always believed that he was a Martian. He was toiling under Mars's surface, but didn't believe that there was anything above it. He didn't believe that he was a slave. So he maintained that Mars was his home, even as a child, even before the Rising.
He was making it his home. That was the whole point.
Exactly. That was the entire point. So that creates this really strange dynamic between the two of them, where they're from the same place. They should have this kinship, but he's a Martian through and always has been. And she sees Martians as outsiders, even though she grew up in the same mind system that he did. And maybe not outsiders, but oppressors almost, or others, not her home.
I think in particular, it also speaks to like their sort of inequality within the system that existed, right? She felt like it was home because she was also a member of the winning clan, right? So she was always treated better, wherein Darrow was fighting to survive on the outside of his and was trying to like make that work, right? So there's some functional things. It's so nice. I know that we haven't like thought or talked about it in a long time, but the first 50 pages, every book become more pertinent and relevant and better, despite not liking them initially. It's just such a striking thing to me in this series, is that portion of the story grows in estimation more and more and more as you move on.
It does. Like, my reread ahead of Lightbringer definitely had a different tone than the first time.
Totally get it. Yeah. And I think that this kind of harkens to that point, though, and it harkens to those differences between them. Mars is the home because that's what he is fighting for. She was safe in the mines, which were her home before. And so they come from different levels of shattered worlds and shattered expectations. But it's important to know that either way, on either side of that coin, it was Darrow's fault. And it's his responsibility as well to repair that.
True. It is.
Or to allow others to, which is her case. So she then proposes a plan. Gets Sigurd to bring her to Volga. Darrow ensures that she understands the consequences of this decision and embarking upon this quest. Severo is certain that Cassius will hate this more than the Thing, and that means that it's time to give Truffle Pig her shot.
Truffle Pig. Truffle Pig.
Truffle Pig.
Truffle Pig. So,
with that, chapter 64, Lysander, the Noble Lie. We head into our only Lysander chapter of the week, and he approaches having survived, in quotes, the Battle of Kalaki, and proceeds to lie to the people he considered his family and his friends to perpetuate the plan that Atlas has set into motion. Does this in part on Roan's recommendation of treating them like mushrooms, and Lysander reflects on how trapped he feels by the Gorgons, Atlas, and Roan.
Well, he is trapped. He is a puppet at this point. Like it or not, he can break his strings at some point, but right now he is a puppet. He doesn't have a choice in what he does, and what he does is perpetuate the lies that Atlas has been building for over a decade. So, what are you going to do? Fuck you, buddy. Sorry. But I do love
He's
that
trapped.
he refers to what's been done to his armor and his Praetorian's armor as doctoring. The Gorgons doctored his armor, and I'm pretty confident that just means he got the shit beat out of him, and they beat the shit out of his armor in kind. So I don't think he took off his armor and they like punched it a bunch of times. I think when he took his beating, he was wearing his armor and probably got shot a couple times. And
fake wounds.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
yeah,
we know that happened. We know that was delivered by Atlas's fists himself, I think.
Right.
But I would be willing to bet he was also wearing his armor and like went down a firing range or something and like got tackled and got shot, and like they made it real.
There's a scene here again of Lysander getting the shit kicked out of him.
Exactly. Yeah. So I imagine the doctoring, quote unquote, was just I laughed at the description or that terminology.
I want to like point this out. I think this is more of like a general commentary. A lot of the series is sometimes billed as like Game of Thrones in space, right? Like occasionally, like that's the pitch, especially for the second series. Lysander is that perspective. Lysander's perspective is that billing to me, because he's the one of whom has to play all of these very political games. Virginia has a little bit of it too, but in particular, he feels so mistreated in the way that like a Game of Thrones character does for his own decisions. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve what he's going through by any stretch, or like hasn't earned or doesn't follow that trajectory. But when like we get buddy and like fun with Darrow and Lyria, it doesn't feel the same as a Lysander chapter of like, oh yeah, no, he had a bad time.
Yeah.
It's always like Lysander had a bad time. And that's like, you could summarize most of Lysander's chapters in this book as Lysander had a bad time.
That's probably true. That's yeah. Even the times when he's running his own circus, like running his own games, he's not having a great time.
He's performing for someone else, you know? Like he's never it doesn't suck to be Lysander, but like he kind of gets dealt a hand based on the choices he's made, right? And you just wish that he would have made different choices so that he wouldn't be dealt the shit hand.
Mm.
The treating him like mushrooms line and like not respecting them and like letting them just bloom. Oh my God, fucking Roan.
Keeping them in the dark and feeding them shit. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep. It's fucking crazy. Like, good shit.
I've heard that line in reference to like parents raising teenagers. Like teenagers
really?
Treat their parents like mushrooms.
Oh,
keep them in the dark and feed them shit.
The other way.
Feed them bullshit.
Yeah. That doesn't feel wrong based on our experiences. I'm out of coffee. I just cheers you with a little coffee mug that I have nothing in.
I'm out of everything. I have water.
Me too. We'll take a break after this one to reload real quick. But we then return to the friends, the aforementioned friends, starting with Cicero, of whom gives him our buddy. I'm not going to call him our boy, but our buddy,
our good
Lysander,
friend, our great protagonist,
our accomplice.
The man who has never
Lysander.
done anything wrong.
Wait
Good
a
boy,
minute.
Lysander.
But Cicero, of course, and hands him back his scepter to lead the Lightbringer and his armada. Pallas, I don't think she's Al Bologna, but she is representing the Bolognas, disagrees and believes that they should return home on behalf of the Bologna family. Lysander responds indirectly by calling to his troops and rallying them predictably, as he would. And I say predictably because he also views this all as theater, which means that he's not in it, which is just such a funny way of inspirational management, realizing that you need to do something, but not actually liking the idea of doing it. Like, that level of understanding is so interesting. And I want to bring up like a real life thing here, unless like
No,
you react first and then I'll talk about that. Yeah.
This feels completely on par with him.
Yeah.
And this feels, I always think back to his commentary on Atalantia when he refers to her as someone he hates almost as much as he hates himself. Like, this is a man who truly loathes himself in all the venom and loathing that he has for Atalantia. He seems to hate himself more. So he understands this game of political theater that he's playing. He understands it back and forth and is playing it very, very, very well. We can dislike his decisions. We can dislike his thoughts, whatever. He's playing it well, all of it. And that doesn't mean that he likes what he's doing. He understands it so well that he knows what he has to do, even if what he has to do is fucking atrocities. He's still willing to do them. So like, that doesn't absolve him of that, but he's not deriving joy in any way from any of his actions throughout any of this story.
Sure. He definitely isn't. And I think that that's a great talking point, especially with this, is like, this is him understanding what needs to be done and doing it, not him believing in what needs to be done. And it's kind of this breaking point to some degree between the way that he was acting before, in the way that he was confidently speaking to these people and believing in these messages that he was giving them. And now he's not rudderless, but his rudder has been forced in a direction. And so he no longer has control of steering. And so he has to do the thing that he needs to.
I was going to describe it like he's a scholar in a theater as opposed to a man forging a path.
Absolutely. And that's such an interesting change, because if we think about it, like in Iron Gold and most of Dark Age, Lysander was the scholar, right? And he was the guy of whom didn't realize what actually was required of him to do these things. Now he's become the man of a kind of a man of action, even if it's disingenuous in some ways, and he breaks from like his own moral code at different times for all kinds of different reasons. He at the very least is a man of action, even if it is disingenuous in some fashion. But now he's kind of forced back into a combination of his old ways and his new ways, because he understands what works and what needs to work, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Just as a point here that I kind of want to add from a real life perspective, Andrew and I, our audio editor and I, were actually co-employees at one point for a company. He was my manager for a brief period. He's also younger than I am by, God, what is it, like 6 months, something like that. It's not that much, but he was managing me for like 3 months, and we became close friends as part of that experience. And we fundamentally managed to similar results, but in completely different ways. And that reminds me specifically of Lysander's like dichotomy of like believing in a message and preaching something versus like understanding what needs to be said. It's just interesting.
Are you calling Andrew, dear Andrew, a Lysander stand-in?
Andrew would admit to being Lysander. That's the important thing. No. And in a Diomedes-esque fashion. That's important, because Lysander would not admit to himself that he is who he is. But Diomedes would, and that is something that I believe that Andrew would do wholeheartedly. He would call himself a shill and a cheat and whatever in different moments. not really a cheat by any stretch, but you know what I mean? Like he would call it out very honestly as it was. And that was always his bag. Meanwhile, 23-year-old Crossland was stuck up his ass with Stoic philosophy and loved it and led that way. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Was a little bit of a different stretch. It's fun. Don't need to talk about it more than that, but that's, just a fun little comparison. We're great friends. So Lysander, though, moves from there and then speaks to his troops as he takes back control of the fleet and orates in grand fashion after what the plan is to be. Lysander is to tackle and take down Fa as he has done incalculable damage to the cause of the society.
So we talked about this a little bit before, but this is seemingly with the Ashvar call setting up this hidden race for glory between him and Darrow that neither of them understand is a race. Rather floppy, one-sided race that is entirely set by Atlas. But
right. The pace established.
Yeah, it is kind of funny to see them both pining after the same goal. One of them sincerely, one of them strictly for theater.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It is very interesting to see how that's actually going to play out, of course, as we see that happen over the coming weeks. So I'm excited. I loved your prediction as well. I'm not going to hold you accountable for it because I didn't take all of it down because it was so complex that there's not like an A/B judgment. But if you're wrong,
I'll drink if I'm wrong. It'll be pretty obvious if I'm wrong.
Yeah. I'm just not going to call it out specifically like we typically or conditionally do. So we then get to more private conversations, and there's this mention of Glorastes as we return to Lysander's valet, Exeter, and it is too much for me. This is sort of the other side of emotional pain that is tough to deal with. It doesn't move me to tears by any stretch, but it just makes me understand that feeling of loss. And I think back to the man, and despite him being a coward more than once, like, it's still, man, you hoped for better.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, Mengele didn't deserve better. So
fair. Glorastes could have done such good for Darrow, for the Republic, for anyone other than Lysander.
It's the potential loss.
But it is something that I'm kind of surprised that we didn't get more commentary on Darrow's side of things about the
But Darrow doesn't really know. Darrow was mad about it in Dark Age.
It's just it feels like maybe. Yeah, you're right. There's been so little chance for the dissemination of intel that there hasn't been a chance for outrage. So it's all good. It's all good.
Is what it is. But worse than Glorastes, of course, is the conversation that comes with Pytha. The fact that Lysander decides to lie to Pytha and keeps it all the same without any consideration for the fact that she is practically his teenage mother figure just stab me in the heart and tear it out.
Yeah.
He does break, but for none of the reasons anticipated, he cries, and based on her understanding, that's about the trauma that he experienced in the battle, but that has nothing to do with why he's crying and why he is the sad, soppy rag piece of shit that he is.
It's about the lack of trauma that he received at the battle.
Right. Yeah. And in reality, in the end, that's his fruits made manifest. He is reaping what he's sown here with Pytha emotionally because he hasn't been honest. And at this point, he'd probably be dead if he was. But what's better, dead or honest?
Yeah, it was particularly brutal, this scene, thinking about and reading his inner monologue and him knowing that he wanted so badly and had resolved to tell her everything after losing Roan as a confidant, and then still not doing that. I do wonder what would have happened if he had confided in her. I can't imagine that he's actually got any amount of privacy at this point. I don't think he should ever assume to be truly able to speak freely, but I wonder if he was, given a scenario where he was truly able to speak freely and talk to Pytha the way that his heart wants to, what she would do. If she would be on his side, if she would rage against it, if she would try to coerce him to act differently, like what would she do? And I don't know. I don't know her that well, to be fair.
It's so interesting because Pytha was willing to rejoin the society, right? Like that's her end here to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
So unlike Cassius, of whom isn't bending back to that master, did. And I can't blame her for that decision, but I also can't feel like she would be very upset with the path that Lysander has walked.
So
were it to be revealed.
I agree with you to a certain degree.
But I'm not saying that's holistically a thing.
No,
I'm just trying to,
no, it is a thing, but I don't think her decision to and her reasoning for rejoining the society and being willing to rejoin the society is indicative of her views on the politics of the society. I think it's probably more so a selfish reasoning. She understands that she would be one of the highest ranking officials in the government, given her relation to Lysander. So like,
there's that. Yeah.
It could be very easily dismissed as a selfish act as opposed to one that is, I genuinely believe that this is good for people. Like she might be perfectly selfish in her decision to go along with what Lysander's doing. And it could also be fear. Like if she decided not to, what's Lysander going to do with her?
True. Yeah, she is trapped on that side of the equation. She might make a different choice if she wasn't, but she's been a mercenary for the last decade or so. So
yeah, I don't think her moral compass is one
sorts,
to be perfectly trusted as indicative of anything.
Society versus republic. Yeah, totally get that. Cool. All right. With that, we get into chapter 65, Lyria, Into the Maelstrom. It's a short chapter, but Lyria carries a message to Volga as she heads up and out of the deep. Lyria reflects how much has changed since all those years ago, when she would have been clutching at her siblings' hands, going through a singular moment like this. And at the end of that, she finds Cassius has joined her on this journey to the surface.
So the transformation that Lyria has gone through is obvious. It's something that we've been commenting on all book, all series. She's been growing, she's been changing, but it is very, very nice to see her recognize it in herself, which is, I'm sure there are other things that you could point to, and I'm sure because I'm dumb and I can't remember things because my brain is broken, I'm sure there are points where she points it out herself, and I'm sure there are points where she points it out herself and I comment on how nice that is. But this feels like the first time that she has pointed it out in her own brain.
It's been culminating at the very least, and this is just another moment of it culminating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's also a lovely moment that happens between her and Cassius here, which is just like this, like, of course I'm not going to let you go and I'm going to protect you until like as far as I can. And it's just this like excellent moment of Cassius showing again that he is the knight that we all know him as.
For sure. And it also makes me realize how much time these characters are spending together outside of what we see. Because these trips take months. These voyages are so long.
Yeah, they spent
lasting.
a quarter on the ship together at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So while it feels like they just met, to us, they've spent every day together for months, and that's a lot closer than a lot of people are to most people that they know.
True. Yeah. Very good point. Especially that like there's like an intimate friendship here in that way. There is a good little Fight Club style reference here between the two of them, as well as while they're conversing, as they talk back and forth about the rules. He says, "Don't get caught," and that there isn't another rule, as she repeats that back to him. As they approach the surface, though, their entire world shifts, and this obsidian that emerges from the depths begins to kill, and this entire scene changes as that Harbinger has arrived and we know that many more are coming.
Oh, holy shit. Is it actually an obsidian? It felt, the way it was described, it felt alien in some. Was it an Askamani? Was it something else entirely? Or was it like a designation of the, like the Askamani, or not the Askamani, the Volk had their, not the Volk, the obsidian in general had their Skoogie. Like, what was it a normal obsidian person with this Harbinger designation, or was it a twisted version of an obsidian that was kind of a monster coming forward?
Based on Sigurd's reaction, my understanding is that this feels more like an Askamani thing, being that like this is the harbinger of what is to come, right? So
Harbinger wasn't
implies,
like the name for this.
No, I think it also is
okay
the name for this, in the same way that like stained is a name and a title and something that's earned. Someone might, or berserker, someone might be appointed or like handed like a title to be like the first one to charge in. I don't think that there's anything uniquely like alien or otherworldly outside of the choice and the sudden brutality to be there, right? So it feels otherworldly, especially from Lyria's perspective. At this point, her like understanding of obsidian violence, I think, is relatively limited, not completely isolated, but like in this regard of seeing war is very, very different, very limited. And she's our perspective. Okay. So to her, it's otherworldly, regardless.
Gotcha.
At the very least, that's my understanding.
That tracks. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what to make of it. So,
with that, we go into chapter 66, Lyria, the Fall of Heraklion. The Fall of Heraklion is a banger of a chapter, not only from title, but also from content. Lyria experiences the raw force of the Volk as they leap from the waters and roar to life. Cassius and Sigurd quickly down a berserker as they take off to meet with Sigurd's planned ride.
I wasn't expecting action from a Lyria scene, from a Lyria chapter. I wasn't expecting like actual technical fighting like this, and it was fun to see her describe what we know could be described much more technically, but like she describes it jaggedly and chaotically. I like the commitment that Pierce Brown seems to have to these perspectives and allows us to really see through their eyes as opposed to defaulting back to how he writes combat, you know?
It really gives weight to the POV, right? And I think that is also why, when you were describing the previous chapter, it does feel like the Herald is completely otherworldly. And it is this, or the Harbinger, not the Herald, that just feels so different and strange. It is just an 8 foot tall. I went back and looked. It's just an 8 foot tall obsidian with
just
fins
an 8
on
foot tall dude
that just starts murdering, right? But it's still like just an obsidian. Like it could, from Darrow's perspective, right? This chapter would have an entirely different context.
Is 8 feet within the
film,
normal height of an obsidian?
I think it's stretched like that's taller than average. But keep in mind, Darrow is like, I want to say 6'10", right?
He's my height, 6'7".
I thought he was a little bit taller than that.
Maybe he was a
because
little bit
I thought
taller.
that people were correcting that
when
we mentioned it.
I remember us talking about him being my height.
I think he's just a little bit taller than you, but basically your height. But then obsidians go up to like 8.5, if I remember correctly. Ragnar is noted as, I believe, over 8 feet tall. So, or like close to. Darrow has to look up at Ragnar, which is terrifying.
I will say, just to kind of bring this backwards a little bit, I think about this a lot because like throughout the day, I'm working all day before we record. But if you go to patreon.com/words and whiskey, maybe I don't have to work all day before we record. Maybe this is my primary job. That'd be pretty cool. Sorry. But while I'm working, I listen to the audiobooks. That tends to be my day. Is I listen to the audiobooks as many times as I can in the days leading up to our recording. And TGR, Tim Gerard Reynolds, somebody that we talk about often because he does such a phenomenal job with this audiobook. He also does not default back to, like, he puts on a different accent for Lyria, a different voice for Lyria, and then Cassius, when Cassius is talking in Lyria's chapter, it's a different voice than when Cassius is talking in Darrow's chapter, because the affectation that he puts on his voice is consistent, but it just makes everything feel so much more true to that character, as opposed to, like, there's something to be said about being consistent across characters and making a narrative story and like an audio drama, but this isn't an audio drama. This is a book being read. And it's nice to have the differences in affectations, but it's also, in that same way, nice to have the perspective differences on the characters that are not the perspective character. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know the words well enough.
I totally get it. I track.
It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very cool. It's very well done. And I think especially managing perspectives, it's also something that's kind of unique to this versus a lot of the other things that we've read, right? Is that it is, because it's first person, because it's limited POV. We are locked in these voices for different chunks of time. And so it exposes us to more immediate emotions and also those variances from point of views and affectations.
Mm-hmm. I would be unsurprised if it turns out that that was unintentional and a relic of the fact that he has to put on such a different voice from Lyria as opposed to Darrow. So when he is reading through this chapter and switches into what Cassius says, it's because he's already in that mode of how he's speaking with Lyria, that when he shifts to Cassius, it takes on a different like tonal shift as opposed to when he's in Darrow's voice. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, like if it was entirely unintentional, but we should get TGR on. We've been saying that since book one, but I would love to.
We definitely should. I would love to talk to TGR. I would love to talk really to like a number of audiobook narrators. I would love to have conversations with, just to like talk through their side of that process. So, like Michael Kramer would be incredible. He is a Minnesotan, which is a fun fact.
He's got no accent as far as I can tell. So
no, yeah. And his wife is British. Kate Redding is British as well. So
turncoat. Fuck you.
All right. There are a couple of quotes that I really appreciate here within kind of the early parts of this chapter. Cassius's moment with Lyria as they're running away and like protecting her as much as he can. He says, "I am your shield, stay in my shadow." And that is just a perfect 8-line encapsulation of Cassius as a knight. I really love that.
Morning knight.
You think about like the way that some characters are like turned into posters and they're turned into like bookmarks or like whatever else. To me, that is Cassius's poster. That is his thing. Yeah. I'm your shield, stay in my shadow. For me, it's perfect. So the next, though, is the way that Lyria describes Jupiter hanging overhead. And she says, "Jupiter stains the glass in stone buildings in bronze light." And it's just so important to remember that they're on this moon, that they're dealing with other forces that aren't just the sun lighting things up, but this sort of like dim brownish reflection coming off of this pearl of the distant solar system is so good. It's so small, but it's so good.
This quote specifically snapped me into this beautiful, gorgeous setting of the chaos of the fighting that's going on, but surrounded by the awe of the planet and the moons drifting around. Like, I can't imagine that there's that much atmosphere like open, because there are so many moons. Like, I'm sure 99%
Jupiter is so massive that you probably don't see the other moons sometimes. But there's I understand.
That, but also like you can see around Jupiter, I'm sure. Like, I'm sure Jupiter takes up a good chunk of the sky, but not all of it. Like, but still, it is so different than looking at the sky in, like, go outside and look up. Like, you probably don't see a dominating, like, planetary body that you're orbiting. Like, you don't. You see the moon and it takes up a tiny little sliver of the sky. Whereas it'd
be closer to the Earthrise shots, right? That you see from the moon to Earth,
exactly.
Right? But that magnified by the size differential, which is insane.
Yeah. So I'm imagining, and like, I don't know exactly. I couldn't pinpoint it, but I know that there is a map on Star Wars Battlefront 2 on PlayStation 2 or PSP, where I played it primarily. That has like a dominating planet in the sky when you're fighting. I don't remember what map it is, but like, that's what I'm imagining here. Like, I know that exists. I know it does. Or it's a different game and I'm mistaken, but
no, I'm pretty sure you're right. I just don't remember the map either specifically, but I'm 95% sure that's correct.
Yeah. One of the moon.
And it does give, it's otherworldly in the way that it should be.
It's so sci-fi. It's so sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I'm so excited to see this translated. if we
Me too. When we get it. But Pierce, in the immortal words of our friend Thomas, the man, the bomb, Boomhauer, gives us just a fucking meal for the rest of this chapter. We get excellent descriptions of the Greys taking out ships. We see a ship from orbit fire back a pillar of light that erases a shop. We just, oh my God, it's this like tether between this distant flake in the sky, and it's gone. And there's just so much here that makes this terrible Askamani raid feel so real and tangible in a way that we've never understood or has been explained to us before. We now have a picture of the terror of the Obsidians.
It's enrapturing and it's terrible and it's brutal.
And
but it's
fucking cool.
So fucking cool.
Yeah. Thanks, Boom, for lending your voice for that. Thanks also to Thomas for being like, hey, if Cross is still sick, I'll come in.
That would have been pretty good.
Would have been a fun one.
Would have been better.
We'll have monsoon.
Whatever shit we've got going right now.
How dare you? Cassius, having arrived at the pickup location, gives Lyria a kiss on the forehead and then takes off despite a little bit of protestation. This leaves Sigurd alone, and he almost gets into a confrontation with a first-man group of Askamani before Judmund the Jolly and Fenrir arrive to save them from the wrath of the asteroid Obsidians.
Judmund, not Goodmund?
Judmund? I fucked that up. GIF, what is it?
I think TGR says Goodmund.
It's Goodmund. It's definitely Goodmund. I said Judmund because I am a little bit intoxicated, folk.
Fenrir is Norse. Like, all of this is Norse, I'm sure, but Fenrir I recognize as a Norse.
Obviously, yeah.
Like, I'm sure most Obsidian have Norse-derived names, but Fenrir is one that like is perfectly recognizable to me, and I can't recall exactly what that comes from.
You don't? Fenrir is like one of the most important parts of Ragnarok. I believe that it is his death specifically that heralds Ragnarok. So,
okay,
very important to the whole of that. I do recommend, PJ, if you're looking for something fun to read on the side, which I know you are from time to time, you have to finish The Ninth House. I don't know if you have yet.
I haven't yet. I still do.
Okay.
So fun fact, I canceled my Kindle Unlimited before it lapsed, and I just turned my Kindle on airplane mode so I can still read it.
Nice.
I'm like halfway through.
Fair enough. I really personally liked The Ninth House. I didn't love Hellbent, but I liked The Ninth House. But Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. Have you read any Gaiman, PJ?
I have never read Gaiman.
My God. I'm going to have to figure out how to do a short pour on a Gaiman book. We're going to have to do one.
I
haven't read Coraline?
Nope.
Have you watched Coraline?
I've watched Coraline.
Okay. So at the very least, like, you've got an idea.
I didn't know it was Gaiman.
It's Gaiman.
Cool.
Sandman? Did you watch the Sandman show?
Nope.
Not that like super matters, but that's a good example. Obviously, you haven't watched American Gods or read American Gods. Jesus Christ, what am I going to do with you? They're just like a handful of these authors.
You
like
already started
reads.
a podcast to make me read shit.
I fucking know.
Well,
all right.
Make me
Very
read
aware.
shit.
We did talk. Hey, in the middle of this, I'm going to pitch this. For you of whom listen on Spotify, I'm going to add this as our Spotify question of the week. What Gaiman book that I post here should we read to do a break between books at some point in one of the next 2 series that we read? We've been asked as a part of fandoms, as a part of like people of whom are subscribers, that sometimes reading 9 books in a row by the same author or 7 or whatever is a lot to ask of a person, especially to be exposed to the same prose. So for a break book in one of the next series that we choose to read, what Gaiman book would you want us to cover? That's going to be the question. I'm going to give you a couple of options.
Are we so I understand that people like read books a lot faster than I do. I understand that people take less than a couple months to read one book and then continue to read the same series for almost or more than a year. Do people get is it uncommon to be able to just blow through an entire series like this?
No, I mean, like, I think a lot of people do, and they like get, I can speak to this from a level on our Patreon. A lot of us read through the Stormlight Archive for the first time together, kind of like vaguely at the same time, or we're reading through different parts of the books. By the time that I and others got around to Rhythm of War after reading 3,800 pages consecutively, plus a couple of like novellas in there, and having, for me at the very least, previously read Warbreaker, Elantris, and Mistborn, basically contiguous to get to this point, I felt pretty burnt out on Brandon Sanderson's like prose and style and things like that. As such, I want to respect that for something like The First Law, of which is 9 books, right? Which we're going to cover next. Naturally, there's going to be a little bit of a break in the middle during the standalones at some point. When Red God comes out, we'll be able to hop over, do Red God, but perhaps before we jump into the final trilogy or whatever we end up doing, we'll squeeze in that Gaiman book, which I think is a good one to squeeze in.
Okay.
So, also, as a note, within the Dark Tower, there are massive gaps in Stephen King's writing of the series. Like, I think the longest one is 13 years between books. So, like, there is a gap that people had to fill with other time and other things. And as such, I kind of feel like it's appropriate for us to read something else in between. So we might break that up with like just like a bonus book before going back. We won't take the same sort of labor of time as we do with a regular series, but I think that it's good to like maybe consider mixing in something else. It's a consideration. So definitely vote in the poll.
Okay. You heard that, Spotify users.
Everyone can vote that has a Spotify
heard that,
account.
Anyone listening?
Leave a comment, leave a review. You know, you can do whatever you like. We love you. There's a final moment that happens here to round out the chapter between Sigurd and Illyria before he leaves, afraid of what will happen when Fa finds Sigurd, knowing he surrendered to Darrow. Sigurd says, "It is our people who should thank you. Unnatural or not, Volga is the blood of Ragnar. The longer she is under Fa's sway, the deeper we fall away from Ragnar's dream. We must return to the sun, the smiles of our mothers. We must have a queen. I tire of kings."
He speaks the truth. Women are just objectively better.
Strictly,
I'd say.
Yeah, no disagreement here. Yeah.
Yep.
I know myself. I know you. I know a lot of other folks. And
good.
Yeah, no. Actually, let me correct. I know you, me, my brother, my dad, my mom, my stepmom, my stepdad, and that's it. That's all I got.
I mean, that's...
my sister. Yeah, but like, do I know her? I don't know.
No.
My like other sister and brother.
Is it truly possible to know them?
Is it? Could we? I mean, not in a biblical sense. That's not what we're talking about at all, PJ. How dare you insinuate that with your eyebrows? But this quote, I love this quote, and like Sigurd finally like admitting, like this idea of just what's needed and what's necessary from the Obsidian perspective.
Moving on. Because I need a hard break from that one. I need a hard break because otherwise I'm going to talk about how you fuck your siblings, I guess.
Oh no! It was a bit. Please don't. All right. With that, chapter 67, Lyria, Volga. This is not a very long chapter, but I have a lot to say about this chapter.
It's a very short chapter.
It's not ridiculously short, but I think it's only 7 pages. You know, unlike Into the Maelstrom, which I think is like 4. But I just have so many feelings about what goes on here between the two of them, and it only gets worse in the next chapter as it actually is exasperated to some degree. We open this chapter with just a brutal image as the pair of Obsidians are bringing Lyria into the fold and into the Obsidian underbelly as she's infiltrated. And we see this chain of golds together turned into chum for the Leviathan as one is kicked off and the rest follow as the weight sinks into the deeps. And holy fuck, what a sight.
What a shift, man. Like, think about, we talked a little bit about the first 50 chapters of Red Rising.
Yeah.
And how it retroactively became a much better written, like, the story became better with context of what came later. And
the writing doesn't change, but everything else does.
Exactly. But these gods walking among us from the first 50 pages of Red Rising are reduced to literal small fish chum in the matter of a couple thousand pages. Like, yeah, it's been a long time. It's been a lot of story. It's clearly, but for whatever reason, I was on this like brainwave of thinking about early Red Rising when we were going through this section, and it's so different. Like even the grays felt larger than life from Darrow's perspective, and the golds were deities, and a literal chain of these deities are just kicked by a man into a lake, ocean, but just
planet.
Unceremoniously ended, fed to something bigger than them.
No more than a series of minnows chained together with fishing line. You know, it is both like a consequential realization and inconsequential, depending on the view of the whole thing. So it's lovely. But we then move on from this larger scene of scope of the Obsidians into Volga. And we cut away from this sort of bigger scene that almost feels reminiscent to me of Star Wars in the way that like you see like an Imperial trooper ship fly in, and then you see like the bigger scene afterwards that's more important. So you get context on what's happening because you see the troops moving around, you see whatever's going on. Then you move to the intimate scene. This is our intimate scene with Volga here, listening to Severo talk about Ragnar and trying to sway Volga away from Fa. Before we talk about Volga, I want to talk about the speech that Severo gives here, because he is really proving to be both an effective and an emotional orator as we round to the end of the series. This is such a growth point for him, and he always kind of like has been to some degree, but he's never been so eloquent and never been so pressed to become this person, which is why I think that this is so wonderful and representative of him. Like he tried during the gallows, but that's not entirely what this is. But we hear him speak about his friend who stole his candy and punted him at the smallest slight, you know, as he stole the candy bar. Like he talks about Ragnar with so much heart that it's impossible to not warm that part of your soul hearing about that man that we lost so long ago here.
Mm-hmm. I like that Volga was able to... I guess the biggest thing for me is that Lyria had the sense to kind of be quiet. And she's still seeing Volga's reaction, and she understands that she's enraptured in this and isn't noticing, presumably, Lyria looking at her. But if that's true, and it seems like it seems like if Volga noticed Lyria watching, she would have turned off the cube and waited until she had some privacy to watch this. But the fact that she doesn't tells me that this is resonating with her. This is truly making an impression. Hopefully, it seems like it at the very least.
It definitely does. You hope, right? Like you hope that it is at this point. We know that it doesn't make the realization that we hope that it does by the end of this chapter. But man, do you just want Severo to be that convincing orator that he was for the thousands of people that came before for her, especially with this personal and personalized story about the man that her father that she doesn't really know, indirect sperm donor, was.
Mm-hmm.
That blood in her veins that she so values, especially into next chapter, right? Like she mentions that specifically to Fa, that we have this blood in our veins, and he goes, it's not about the blood in our veins, it's about the power of the crown. And that's an important differentiation between Severo and Fa's points. But we get to Volga, and boyo, this fucking breaks my heart. To see that she's been charmed by the brute that is Fa and the power that he holds, and her being this inheritor of that power is painful, it's brilliant, it's well done, it sucks. But nothing, I think, hurts quite so bad as the citation that eating Ephraim's heart was a sign of respect for him. And, like, that's difficult to wrestle with in a number of different ways. Of course, we kind of understand from Fa's perspective that he actually did respect him and that it is kind of like a thing. But still, to be demeaned so much by a member of this opposing faction in force, I mean, it hurts deeply for me. Her retort about Ephraim isn't necessarily wrong, that he isn't like he was never a father, he was a mercenary, he was kind of a piece of shit, he did a lot of things wrong, but it's not holistic, it's not a full view. And it's just a tough pill to swallow on the whole from Volga's perspective. Yeah.
She has always been so impressionable, which was a weak point. From the beginning, even though it served us when Ephraim was kind of at the heart of that impression.
But it was like...
Yeah, it was always...
It was not manipulation. This is manipulation. Like, that's kind of the...
Maybe. Yeah, that's true from our perspective, but at the same time, like, you could argue...
Fog views this,
You could argue that it was. But...
Different levels, different degrees.
Different degrees, same mechanism. So
personality traits are personality traits.
Yeah, the situation with Fa isn't different in that respect. And I can only really hope that message we've been talking about from Severo shakes her a little bit. And it might not be right away. Are you familiar with Tesla's earthquake machine? Nikola Tesla's earthquake machine?
Not immediately, no.
Okay. So this is folklore. I don't know how much real math there is to it, but he produced this machine that he attached to the foundation, like, support beam of his building that resonated with it and was meant to kind of match the resonant frequencies and eventually crumble the building just from this small little compact device attached to the foundation. And the idea was that something similar could be created to literally break apart the earth, theoretically.
Okay. I understand.
But it's all
the idea of resonant frequencies, and like you can see some of that like theory applied in like bridges, and like you can go to YouTube and find out a lot about resonance
for sure. But it all takes time. So hopefully this message from Severo is a Tesla earthquake machine for Volga to break apart her brainwashing.
Oh no. Oh God. I see the work that you were doing now there. Good work. I love that. That.
Just something to slowly, methodically, rhythmically shake apart her entrenched brainwashing that she's received from Fa.
Over the time frame. Yeah. Good point. Love that. Really, really appreciate that as a point.
It's a lot more complex than that. That is a very pared down,
rudimentary
version of how that worked. Go look that up. It's a really cool. I think there's a lot of speculation on how much of it is actually true in general. The theory of it is not not rooted in reality, but
the theory for a building could work. But yeah, the rest of the Earth is
potentially, maybe, kind of.
You could.
There's so much variation in the materials and all things that go in. Like if it was uniform and if it was like truly a uniform model that could be affected that way, maybe, but there's so many materials and so many variances within a building that I don't think there'd be a way to make a resonant crumbling device. But I might be wrong. I haven't looked into it as closely as I should have.
I'd be curious. I'll interrogate our other physics friend and discuss the idea.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll call upon Greg Terlecki for his powers.
Let's do it. This would be fun.
So this, of course, only escalates and gets worse as Lyria fires back at Victra, the quick-witted, smart-mouthed woman that she is, and their experiences that they've shared together up until this point as this sort of pressure point that she hopes to apply against Volga to understand their kinship, their bond. Most telling, of course, in this moment is the way that Volga almost calls herself out by saying, "I am not a monster," without any provocation.
It's so sad.
So sad.
Yeah, it makes like it's not the right takeaway, but it makes me miss Ephraim. Like I know, like,
but he reaffirmed that to her. You know what I mean? Like I do understand why you miss Ephraim.
Yeah,
that's the whole point.
This is something that this is beyond her dealing with Fa. This is something that she has dealt with her entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a gut reaction to anything that questions her decision making is calling into question whether or not she's a monster.
Yeah. And that's painful. That's tough to deal with.
It is. And I'd argue, yeah, now she is. She is acting like a monster. She's acting like it. Maybe she isn't one. Maybe. But if she's doing it wholeheartedly and doing it with her, like, at what point do you become a monster? Even if you're redeemable, at what point does that become true? Because it feels pretty close to true at this point.
At what point does that line break and a person is irredeemable, right?
I'm not talking irredeemable. You can be a monster and still be redeemable. At what point does it become true?
Okay. I guess I equate those lines similarly, but I understand what you're saying. Like, you can become a monster long before, like, you're even considering redeemable or not. Like, your actions can determine that well before. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Like, unless a monster is by definition irredeemable. It depends on how you define it.
No. And I think your definition before this point is actually better because it defines the fact that you can be a monster. And like Darrow, by many regards, is a monster. Yeah, absolutely. You know, Elsier is a monster in the way that he acts and behaves.
Tactus was a monster.
Book. Yeah, Tactus, yes.
Was he redeemable?
Great question.
Yeah, but the fact that it's not, the fact that it's a question.
Yep.
is
so important. And that's why I
Mhm.
love people that talk about redemption as an idea for a character and not something that's off the table the moment that they do something wrong.
right. So, like, I would argue that Volga is acting like a monster. Volga
Acting
here
like. Isn't necessarily, but acting like.
yeah. But might be a monster.
Yep. Might be. Absolutely. It's called into question.
And this call, or this mantra of "I'm not a monster" it carries a different weight in that respect, in that I believe her, but her actions don't back it up like it did before.
Right. Her actions call that into question.
Mhm.
And there's another side here as well with Volga that arises. There's this side of like education that's happened in her intervening time. We've had all these other relationships built, and of course one is built between Volga and Fa, but one of the most important things for Volga is this sort of understanding of history and this enlightenment that she's experienced through the ability to read and the capability to understand and comprehend texts. And she sees these things. She sees these similarities in people and histories in a way that is very plain and textual for us as we're reading through this, but is enlightening to her in this moment to understand conquerors and the idea of conquering, considering the history that has been held back, especially from Obsidians. There's a quote here. Well, I mean, it's not really a quote, but Lyria draws the comparison between her and Harmony, and Volga in this moment stands her ground and offers Lyria her freedom in this passage home. Lyria, ever the firebrand, retorts, "Aren't you listening? I don't want a path home. You are my people, Volga. I came here for you, and I'm not leaving without you. I already lost one sister. I won't lose you too."
She has such good instincts. Always. She always has, and it's always worked out for her. She takes these stands, these risks, and they haven't been as dire necessarily. Some of them have, but for the most part, like, they've been a little bit smaller scale, and that's okay. But because they've totally worked out. Her interactions with Darrow have totally worked out. Her interactions with Kavax have totally worked out. And it feels counter to what is normal. And this one, unfortunately, despite rooting for it and wanting it, seems like a miss. It's unfortunate. It's still a great speech. It's still really well done. And it would have swayed all of the people that came before this, where she took a stand if they were in the same situation. Mm-hmm. But if Olga doesn't, like, she maybe does, but we know the outcome a little bit later. I've got some reservations about what might happen, which could go against what I'm saying here, but how it's presented within the next couple chapters feels like a miss, unfortunately.
She tried. She swung.
Yeah, she didn't hard. Make a mistake, I don't think.
Right.
By it being a miss, I don't think it's a mistake. I think it just didn't work out the way that it has historically for her.
We end this chapter with the heads of Goodmund and Fenrir falling into Lyria's lap as it's unveiled that part of the plot has unfurled itself one way or another.
Plop.
Bull. Yeah.
I like those guys. I really like them.
I did too. It's kind of sad that they're dead so quick, you know? But
I do.
Like you mentioned earlier.
Man, I fucking love TGR's like very cartoonish Scandinavian accent that he gives.
Yeah.
Some of the general Obsidian that we interact with.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It feels like us. It feels like home. It feels like
Minnesota,
Iron
classic.
Range, Minnesota, right. Almost.
Right.
Like if you go a couple hours north, like yes, we have a fairly strong accent. I would say yours less than mine. I would guess.
Fun fact: few people can pick out where I'm from based on me talking because they don't assume. But there are a couple of words that
there
do
are a
give
couple
me away,
words that give you
sure.
away. But I'd say I'd probably have the stronger accent.
You definitely have the stronger accent.
But Fenrir and what's his?
Give it away right away.
Yeah.
Goodman. Yeah.
That's the if you see the Coen brothers movie Fargo, it's a very good representation of the cartoonish exaggeration of the Minnesota accent
that we're talking about.
And it
embodies them.
But it's rooted in Scandinavia, I'd say.
Yeah.
And this is reminiscent of that, I guess.
All right, cool. With that, let's get into chapter 68, Lyria, the King and His Court. We find ourselves on the Nixian Isles. PJ, any idea on this reference?
Nope.
No? Well, it has to do... Did you ever play Hades? Did you play Hades?
Nope.
God damn it, you have to play Hades. But it
Steam
has
Deck?
to do with Nyx...
Or a phone?
Yeah, of course. It's coming to phone. It's not out yet, but it will be soon, actually. But you can play on Steam Deck, computer, the PS4 that you have, whatever works. But any number of options.
I forgot I had Tim's PS4.
There are only a couple of games that I put several... Or your Switch. You could play it on your Switch, too.
Oh,
because that's where I first played it, was on my Switch. There are only a couple of games in the last several years that I put hundreds of hours into. Slay the Spire, Elden Ring, and Hades are the three that have gotten my most attention over the time frame.
Okay.
But anyway, I digress. Go play it. It's a ton of fun. It's a great story game. It's a little bit of a roguelike. It's wonderful. Love it. Easy to pick up and drop off, which is the other side. Like, it doesn't require consistent commitment to like sit there and play for a long time, which I know is like one of your things. But the Nixian Isles has a lot to do with Nyx or Nox, the Greek/Roman goddess of night. She's referenced a handful of times in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and equated a handful of times over the course of the series as they talk about night, and obviously it's this primordial essence that permeates a lot of the mythology. Its grid, of course, is here equated to these unique islands, and to me, this is more of like a namesake than it is anything else. This is not something that is very referential necessarily, but it does have like a wink and a nudge and a nod to Nyx and this idea.
Nyx or Nox? Like, I get that it's not that critical to the story itself, but do you think it's the Roman one or the Greek one? Like, which one? Which one could it be?
The Noxian Isles, if it was the Roman one.
That's a good point. That's a good point. These
Isles. So this is Greek.
They really should have like gotten together and shared some redundant workload.
I wanted to just say this is more of a general thing, but the Rim adheres more to Greco naming nomenclature than the core does, which adheres to Roman nomenclature.
That's really interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah, isn't it?
I hadn't.
It's not entirely accurate,
it
but it's
because
pretty
I don't
close.
Understand it that well because I'm a dummy, but that's pretty sweet.
It's just not your area of expertise. Fun. I really enjoyed the conversation with Nicator here as the Copper explains to us the hierarchy that is being reestablished with Lyria directly by the Obsidians and how they have supported that inadvertently. There's this wonderful bit where she offers her this pill as Lyria views it, and she flicks it off because she's not going to kill herself. And then she explains that it wasn't to kill herself, it was a breath mint so that she didn't have to taste her own breath instead of the mask that was to come. It was a light release, which you can understand Lyria's perspective on it be like this is a subversion of expectation if I've ever read one, but it's just great.
I mean, naturally, if this person was born in the core, they'd be called Nakator. Something I greatly appreciated about all of this was a quote of regarding the hierarchy and it basically being recreated in this scenario. If you grew up in a house that is square, what shape would you think to build your house in? Such a great quote. And I'm sure I feel like I've heard that before. So I'm not convinced that this is unique here or this is not evocative of something more famous. If I'm wrong and this is unique to this, I apologize, Mr. Pierce Brown. But for some reason, I feel like I've heard that argument made before. But either way, it's a great point to bring up in this scenario. obviously, through the lens of the Republic and the Daughters, we know that society, lowercase s society, can be built in ways that don't mirror the hierarchy of the society, capital S. But it's cool to see the rationalization. And it's almost certainly influenced by some amount of propaganda. Like, I can't imagine that this, but that's not true. I could imagine this popping up in a vacuum, but that would be a vacuum devoid of information on how the world worked under the society. Whereas this feels like they tried to cut that all out and rebuild in the way that was the quote unquote most logical, without taking into consideration how the society treated the lower colors, of which are the obsidian.
I think this book goes to great lengths to try to define the way that cultures can grow, like, within or without, right? Especially if you think about the perspective from Mateo and Quick and their plan with the Oculus / Tabula Rasa, right? Like, will they reestablish a hierarchy immediately in the same way that we expect that the Obsidians already did? No. The other side to evaluate the Obsidians from is it's obviously being manipulated. This has nothing to do with the quote. I love the quote. I think it's incredible. And I think that it raises this whole question, which is fascinating to interrogate. But is this not just Atlas's manipulation in some way manifest, right? Like, is this not just a re-representation of the same thing?
I think so.
Atlas knows it's effective, right? And so to the effect of the quote, this is saying, like, we repeat the mistakes of our forefathers because it's the only thing that we know to do, basically. We're mimetic creatures. I don't disagree with that on premise. But in this context, it's like manipulated mimeticism.
Yeah, I guess propaganda might be the wrong way to put it. But
yeah, it's close. I understand where you're going for.
This rationalization of how a very similar structure could be growing, even if they had no interaction with Atlas or somebody influenced by Atlas, to see what's going on within this Volk Oskamani Fa-led society and say, like, hey, that looks a lot like the society pyramid. That's because they lived under it for so long that they don't know anything else. And they're just building what they know. Like, that's a great rationalization, even though it's entirely bullshit and fed by Atlas and by extension the society remnant.
It does, like, it has that sort of political extension. I love that comparison, PJ. I think that you've done a wonderful job expounding upon the side that I was looking for. You know, PJ, there are moments in which I'd like write ideas or thoughts here, and like I just want for you to like dig in. And this was a perfect dig in moment, if that makes sense for me.
You're just playing in the sandbox that has a like floor. I'm digging in the sand. At the beach.
So like
there's no floor to that beach.
As the leader, one of the troubles is sometimes like I might want to dig into something, but if you don't immediately, like this is the trouble between like Hallerpod and us, or not the trouble, but like a disparity or a difference between Hallerpod, Hail Reaper, and us, and Fade to Obsidian, is that because we are sort of a pure read podcast, there are things that I want to dig into, but if you don't pick up on them, we don't get to dig into them until much later, until like we do our recaps and stuff like that. But every once in a while, like you catch wind of something that I'm going for, and we just get to talk about it for a bit, which is great. And this is a perfect example of that, because I did want to cite that quote, but I felt like it was too precise to cite. And so it's
sorry to
nice
say
and
that
cool.
you were
It warms
playing
my heart.
in the sandbox that didn't have an actual bottom.
Well, I potty trained myself in a sandbox, so like I am very aware of sandboxes, and
I've
their
been in that
depths.
sandbox. It was gross.
You were not. I don't think you were ever in that sandbox. Not that you couldn't have been. You didn't live that far away.
I'm
But
kidding.
Adam
I'm
was.
kidding.
Anyway,
I'm kidding.
with that, we return to Volga and Lyria and Lyria gets her first proper meeting with Fa, and he's still a very intimidating Obsidian by all accounts, of course. He's this commander. He's this terrifying voice as we hear from the end of TGR's register, by all accounts. But Lyria tries her best and spits out truth about Atlas, although no one at the party pays attention to her in this victory moment.
The voice from TGR was insane.
It was a lot more. I was closer to Ragnar, I think, in my estimation.
Yeah.
You were closer to Fa.
His is comical. His is...
It is. It truly is.
His is something that is not sustainable. It's not a speaking voice. TGR is great at his range of speaking voices. Foz is outside of that consideration. Foz is entirely... It's just not something that you can speak in for an extended period of time. And it's well done. It's a voice changer that we know of. Like we understand that it's a voice changer, but it is, I remember laughing out loud, like between thinking about TGR's Ragnar and TGR's Fa. It's comical. And I was, for the week or two that we had where I had heard Fa's voice from TGR, and when we heard his actual speaking voice with Atlas, like I think it was 1 week. Like I think we heard
it was.
I laughed at it. I really thought it was funny. And I didn't feel like it was real.
This is one of those small things that is a problem, only actually in the audiobook, because when we're introduced to Fa originally, it's from Ephraim's voice narrator, and he does such a good job that when TGR picks it up, it feels very different. It feels foreign. We don't have enough time with it in that narrator's accent and idea of what that character is to really understand what he's going for. And so it does feel like a caricature, almost like you're saying, of something that existed before. Then when he's also revealed to kind of be a caricature of the person, it feels like that doubles down in that idea, if that makes sense.
So I didn't quite take it that way.
Yeah. I caricature is way too harsh of a word.
No,
We've said
it's
that
not.
a couple of times.
It's
over the
totally,
course.
it's the right word. It's the right word, but a caricature, you described it as a caricature of the character that we've come to know. And I took it as a caricature of a Ragnar-esque warlord, which I think is more in line in what TGR is doing here. And I'm maybe approaching this with too much context, but I would assume that TGR understands who Fa is by the time he actually starts recording, and made this choice to make this really aggressive, characterized voice for Fa. This is something that I would absolutely dig into and talk to TGR about if we had the opportunity to interview him. Is his approach to Fa as opposed to Ragnar, and how that came to be, and if Fa's voice from the previous books even crossed his mind when he was deciding it. Because I don't think it did.
It didn't necessarily. For me, just to bring it to some semblance of a comparison, I imagine a Morton Joe from Fury Road, where he's got sort of the dramatic voice, and then when unplugged, he becomes kind of like a regular dude.
Yeah.
And that feels very reminiscent to some degree of what Fa is, and is kind of like faking to be in many ways.
Right. Totally.
So Volga, ultimately, though, throughout all of this conversation that we had about Fa, is ultimately lauded by Fa because she does decide to go with him on his side of things because she sees him as this educator, this person who has opened her eyes by and large to the world and everything that's happened. And no one else really has. I mean, like if you think about Ephraim, even Ephraim is like kept her in the dark, kept her close, but in the dark, and hasn't like done the same sort of process. So she chooses to hand over the cube of Severa's message to him. Volga asks for Lyria to be respected as a part of this process, but begins to unfurl what we'll find to be happening in the next chapter as we see sort of that process come undone as her truth needs to be realized and rationalized. And we'll get to that here. And we also find that Syraxes is coming to be killed in the same holy manner as Abraxas and Fero something or other, the holy raptor that was killed previously on Callisto as well. So these holy beasts slayed one after another, the feast of the Ascamani.
So there's a lot of ways to interpret what happens when Volga hands over the cube to Fa, because as it's described, she hands the cube to him and he just says more lies. So this is Lyria's perspective, understandably. So it's either Volga has talked about what was on the cube to Fa before handing it over. Fa is very intuitive to how Volga acts and just assumes that she got a cache of information from an external source that is trying to pit her against him. Or, like, there's a bunch of different options, but those are the two main ones that I can think of. But what it tells me, assuming that Lyria hasn't been outside of Volga's periphery for more than an extended period of time, it tells me that Fa is spying on everyone close to him. And it seems like Fa has listened in on that message from Severo, which isn't dire by any means. There's nothing like super secret that Severo drops, but for him to so quickly just say, "Oh, that's lies," without her saying anything when she hands him the cube is very suspect. But there's a lot that there's 3 full days in the intervening time, and we don't really know what happens between them.
Yeah, of course there is. And there is like this entire spectrum of relationship that is developed between these characters that we're just cognizant of, but not necessarily aware of. So it's tough to say the way that this shakes out entirely, but it does feel evocative of her being on his side. It's tough to not ignore that, despite all the other sways we might have.
True.
With that, we get into chapter 69 here. Lyria, the Hour of Hunger. The Obsidian, previously mentioned in the last chapter, Gerla, seemingly summons the great Leviathan from the deep. We know that this has been chummed previously, and extends the offer that only kings are allowed to kill kings before Fa brings the beast and kills it with his trident. The trident, of course, that was claimed previously from the ruler of this planet, one of the golds. And Lyria is still broken by Volga's choice in this moment, just shattered by her decision. Similarly, Sigurd doesn't think favorably of this very moment and feels identically forsaken by not only his own people, but his leader as well.
God damn it. I am in agreement with probably everybody assuming that this is thinking that this is a terrible action to take. And it's good that so many seem to be villainizing Fa. for this action. But holy shit, would it be cool to see a stained glass window of this scene of Fa killing a Leviathan, the biggest Leviathan ever, with a fucking trident. Such a cool prospect. It would make such a cool, like, still shot image. But, fuck. I don't know.
Yeah. Undoubtedly, inside of any kind of adaptation, this will just be a massive moment as he rears that down into the beast underneath. Vagnar, Ba, gives an excellent speech that explains how he has done such a good job leading, and then also he turns and offers the passage of Stains to Volga to follow in his path. And here we stand now understanding what this means, what the passage of Stains is to begin with in the end. He counts off all the names in a line before he gets to Lyria and calls her a rat. Volga understands her charge, but wishes to deny her fate before she accepts it in the end and dons the gauntlet.
Motherfucker. This doesn't seem like this is horrible. This is hard to reckon with. But at the same time, it doesn't feel horrible enough to really meet the criteria that we've been presented with to become a stained. Like, this feels like theater. This feels like cherry-picked for Volga herself to feel like she's meeting the criteria of the trial of the stained. But it doesn't seem to match up with the horrors that are alluded to in previous books.
Interesting. I am curious on some of those thoughts, and I think that we will get to interrogate them sooner than later. So,
I agree. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, I'm very sure that you believe in that. But the choice to even grab the gauntlet to begin with is one in which she is ensuring and protecting her own life.
For sure. Totally. Like that's
but also
not arguable.
Other ramifications. Yeah. Cool. All right. So do you have any thoughts on Lyria's likely end here, or on the passage of Stains holistically? I mean, obviously you said that you don't believe that that's the passage, but at the very least thinking about Lyria.
Well, so I guess my point of I don't believe this is the passage is I don't believe this is the passage that Ragnar went through. I don't believe this is the same passage that historically stood. But that doesn't exist anymore. And this is probably as emotionally devastating for Volga specifically as anything else could be. So, like, it's irrelevant, I guess. But I still think there's a chance that Lyria gets out of this. It seems like something where Volga would try to either like flub her way through it or fake kill Lyria but still keep her alive, like kind of have it both ways, have her cake and eat it too, I guess. Because we've already mentioned that phrase in the past in this episode. I don't think that'll end well, but it feels like something where during this passage, she will subtly give direction to Lyria to act dead and not actually kill her.
All right, cool. With that, we've reached the end of this week. PJ, next week, we're going to end part 3, Tempest, reading chapters 70 through 77. PJ?
A lot of sevens there.
There's a lot of sevens. This is a 7 week. This is a 70 times 7 times 7 kind of week, you know? Some straight brand new shit. But very excited for what this is going to lead to on the whole. And that is where we will leave y'all for this week. Wrapping up next week, wrapping up part 3. Perfect.
So that's where we will leave you for this week.
Thank you so much to Tim and Andrew for being the backbone that keeps us running. We've talked about it over the course of this week and many other times, but I greatly appreciate the work that both of them do to ensure that we are even solvent to begin with. It can't be underemphasized or overstated how much they mean to us. I know that we make like a bit of the ending of this as much and as often as we can, but I think it's important sometimes to be very wholesome and understand that like we literally wouldn't be a hosted show without Tim and the work that he's done to set it up.
God, it's insane how much work he's given us.
It's crazy how much work he actually does for us.
If we had to pay for his work, we couldn't afford it. Like we couldn't.
No. Similarly, Andrew does this out of the kindness of his heart and out of the joy of doing this, and we compensate them with like parts of our company and everything else. But I mean, it nonetheless. Andrew,
I could sell some organs and afford that,
right?
But I don't want to. I like my organs, so
we prefer our kidneys inside, and so truly, when we say we thank Tim and Andrew, I just hope that you understand that they are the show. By and large, they are the reasons that we were able to do the show. We're obviously the faces. They're the spines. They're the Lyrias.
Yep. Better than Lyria.
I also want to take a moment and thank Shine for returning to our Patreon. Thank you so much for rejoining us as a mixologist. I know, of course, that you were away for reasons that are obviously disclosed within your own life and that we understand, but that happens from time to time. Glad to have you back.
Woo! Welcome back. If you would like to review our show on any platform that allows reviews, which I believe are most platforms, iTunes for sure. I think Spotify does now too, and maybe some others, I don't know. But give us the max amount of stars or ratings as possible and drop us a good, feel-good note. That'd be pretty cool. We read them. We read all of them.
We do.
And if they're good, I smile for the rest of the day, which is good. I like smiling.
And if they're bad, I talk to my therapist about it.
If they're bad, Crossland beats me. And
well, that's not true.
So leave a 5-star review or Crossland will beat me.
Wow. Beyond that, find us at Words Whiskey Pod on Threads, Blue Sky, technically X until that platform fully dies, Instagram, Reddit, and otherwise. wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com if you want to send us an email and any thoughts and anything that's going on. Join us at patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey if you want to understand the back end and talk to us a little bit about the different series that we're reading and what we're thinking about week to week. We're so excited to have you all there. Everything is going swell. Beyond that, we'll see you next week for the end of part 3, Tempest.
If you feel like giving a bad review, like a less than 5-star review, you can send that instead of sending that on like the platform, which hurts us. Send it to wordswhiskyshow@gmail.com. Send us the negative review and then tell Crossland how to beat me.
I dislike that as a premise, but I understand. It's better in some ways, but it's worse in a lot of others. We'll see you next week.
Bye.